3 o'clock in the morning is a different kind of monster when you can't sleep, but it's a whole other demon when you can't walk. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that has weight pressing down on your chest until you feel like you're suffocating in the dark. This place used to be a fortress of power, a monument to the blood, sweat, and iron will of the man they called the director. Now, it was just a graveyard of expensive furniture and broken dreams. The only thing moving in the dead air was the rhythmic, agonizing scrape of rubber wheels against the polished hardwood floor. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Jae-hoon pushed himself toward the bathroom, his arms, once thick with muscle and the ink of his clan, trembling under the dead weight of his own lower body. Sweat beaded on his forehead, cold and slick like oil. His breath came in ragged, shallow hisses. He wasn't just fighting the distance. He was fighting the fire. A phantom fire. His legs were cold, useless slabs of meat, but his brain was screaming that they were being held in a furnace. The doctors called it neuropathic pain. Jae-hoon called it hell. He reached the marble counter, his eyes fixed on the orange pill bottle sitting near the sink. It was too high. He stared at it, his vision blurring. Who had put it there? A ghost. Or was it a deliberate cruelty? No one was left to move things by accident anymore. His fingers stretched, every tendon in his neck popping. He just needed one pill, one tiny white tablet to stop the screaming in his nerves. He leaned forward, the wheelchair creaking under the strain of his shifting weight. His fingertips brushed the smooth plastic, just a fraction of an inch. The bottle tipped. It didn't fall into his hand. It tumbled. It bounced off the edge of the cold sink and crashed onto the dark marble tile with a sound like a gunshot. The cap popped off, and the white pills exploded across the floor like tiny, mocking stars. Jae-hoon froze. He stared at the mess. He stared at the reflection of the hollow-eyed man in the mirror, a man who used to make world leaders wait for an appointment, now defeated by a piece of plastic. No, the word started as a low growl in his throat and ended as a shattered, guttural sob. He slammed his fist against the armrest of the chair, again and again, until his knuckles split and his blood smeared on the metal. No, no, no. He wanted to tear the room apart, to set the whole building on fire, but he couldn't even reach the floor to pick up his medicine. He slumped forward, his forehead resting on the cool marble, gasping for air, the tears he swore he'd never cry finally burning tracks through the dust on his face. Then, a shadow fell across the doorway. Jae-hoon didn't look up. He didn't want to see the pity. He didn't want to see another temporary nurse looking at him like a broken toy that should have been thrown away months ago. "Get out," he snarled, his voice a wreck of gravel and glass. "I didn't call for you. I didn't ask for an audience for my funeral." The shadow didn't move. "You have two choices, Mr. Kang." The voice was calm, steady, deep. It had a cadence he wasn't used to, an American accent, grounded and strong, carrying a weight of its own. Nia Reed stepped into the bathroom light. She was tall, her skin the color of deep mahogany, her hair pulled back into neat, tight braids that spoke of discipline. She was wearing a simple gray tracksuit, her arms crossed. She didn't look like a nurse. She looked like a sentry on duty at the edge of the world. "Choice one," Nia said, kneeling down to gather the scattered pills with deliberate, unhurried movements. "I help you pick these up. We get you back into bed. You take your medicine, and you try to find some peace so you can fight another day." She dropped the pills into the bottle, one by one, the clicking sound echoing in the silence. Or choice two. You sit here in the dark, staring at the floor until the sun comes up, and you die alone in your own rage. Jae-hoon's head snapped up. His eyes flashed with a remnant of the old lightning that used to make his lieutenants tremble. "Get out," he roared, his voice cracking. "I don't need your help. I don't need your words. I am the director. I don't need anyone." Nia stood up and placed the bottle on the very edge of the counter, right where his hand could reach it without straining. She didn't flinch at his rage. She didn't back down. "Good," she said softly, "because I'm not offering help because you're weak. I'm offering it because you're a man. Your wife already made her choice, Jae-hoon. She chose the exit. She chose the coward's way out. Now you have to decide if you're staying for the sequel or if you're following her out the door." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Jae-hoon stared at her, his chest heaving. For the first time in 3 months, someone had looked him in the eye and spoken to the man, not the patient. He looked at the pills. He looked at Nia. And somewhere deep in the charred wreckage of his soul, a spark, tiny, hot, and ancient, refused to go out. Welcome to Afro K Dark Diaries. If you think you've seen betrayal, you haven't seen this. This is a story about a man who built a kingdom on the docks of Incheon, a woman who tried to burn it all for a taste of the throne, and the one person who walked into the fire to save the king when even his own blood turned to ash. This is a journey through the darkest parts of the human heart, where loyalty is the only currency that matters. If this story hits you where it counts, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't just watch from the shadows, join the diary. Let's go. To understand the fall, you have to understand the height. 3 months ago, Kang Jae-hoon was the Dragon of Seoul. He didn't just own Kang Logistics, he owned the very air the cargo moved through. He was a man of absolute precision. Every suit was bespoke. Every contract was ironclad. Every movement was calculated to the millimeter. He rose from the gutters of Busan, the son of a man who sold fish heads to keep the lights on. He had clawed his way to the top with a combination of genius-level business strategy and a willingness to do the things the law was too afraid to even whisper about. He had the empire. He had the fear of his enemies. And he had Seo-yoon, his wife. She was a porcelain doll with a heart of dry ice, a former runway model who wore diamonds like they were scales of armor. He had chased her for 2 years, buying her every dream, every designer bag, every penthouse in every city she mentioned until she finally said yes. He thought he had conquered her. He thought she was the prize for his life of war. He didn't realize he had just invited a viper into his bed to sleep next to his throat. The morning of the crash was like any other rainy Tuesday in Seoul. The gray clouds were hanging low over the skyscrapers, weeping a steady, cold drizzle. Jae-hoon was finishing his coffee, checking his gold Patek Philippe. Seo-yoon was standing behind him in the foyer, her hands on his shoulders, smoothing the fabric of his silk tie with a tenderness that felt real. "You look tense, husband," she whispered. Her voice was like honey poured over a razor blade. "The trade meeting in Busan is a mess," Jae-hoon replied, his mind already miles away. "The local unions are getting restless, and the triads are trying to stick their fingers in my export lanes. I need to remind them whose flag flies over the docks before they forget their place." Seo-yoon leaned down and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Her lips were cold. They were always cold. "You'll handle them," she said. "You're the director. No one stands in your way for long. I'll have a quiet dinner waiting when you return." He walked out to the elevator, where his lieutenant Min-ho was waiting. Min-ho was a brother. They had bled together in the back alleys of the city before they ever stepped into a boardroom. They had shared meals when they had nothing, and Jae-hoon had made him a king in his own right. "Secure?" Jae-hoon asked. Min-ho nodded, his face a mask of perfect, unbreakable loyalty. "The route is cleared, boss. The armored Mercedes is idling in the basement. We'll be in Busan by noon." They rode down in silence. Jae-hoon got into the back of the heavy, black sedan. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the neon signs of the city into streaks of blue and red. He was reading a file on his tablet, focused on the numbers, on the leverage he was about to exert. He was so focused on the future that he didn't see the present coming for him. He didn't see the black semi-truck idling at the intersection with its lights off. He didn't hear the tires scream until it was too late. The impact felt like the end of the world, a massive, bone-shattering crunch of metal on metal. The armored Mercedes was tossed like a toy. It flipped. Once. Twice. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass, sparks, and the smell of ozone. Jae-hoon was thrown against the door, his head snapping back with a force that should have killed him. A white-hot agony exploded in his lower back, followed by a silence so deep it felt like death. He was upside down, hanging by his seatbelt. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber was thick, choking his lungs. He tried to move his arm. It worked. He tried to reach for the door handle, but the frame was crushed. "Min-ho," he croaked. "Min-ho." Through the spiderweb of the cracked windshield, he saw a figure moving. Min-ho had crawled out of the front seat. He was bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, but he was standing perfectly straight. He was walking toward the back door, but he wasn't rushing. He was strolling. Jae-hoon felt a surge of relief, a moment of gratitude that his brother was okay. "Get me out," he shouted, his voice cracking. "The car is leaking. It's going to blow." Min-ho stopped at the window. He leaned down and looked inside. He saw Jae-hoon trapped, helpless, bleeding, and then Min-ho smiled. It wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smile of liberation. It was the look of a man who had finally stopped pretending. He pulled out his phone and made a call, his eyes never leaving Jae-hoon's. "It's done," he said into the receiver, his voice flat and cold. "The dragon is grounded. You can start the transfers. Min-ho didn't pull the door. He didn't call for an ambulance. He didn't even look back as he turned and walked away into the rain, leaving Jae-hoon to wait for the fire to find the gasoline. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, the high-pitched beep of monitors, and the cloying scent of antiseptic. When Jae-hoon finally woke up from the first surgery, he felt light. Too light. It was as if the bottom half of his body had simply evaporated. "Mr. Kang?" A doctor was standing over him, his face a mask of professional concern. "Can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" "My legs," Jae-hoon rasped, his throat feeling like he'd swallowed glass. "I can't feel my legs." The doctor's expression shifted, that practiced, clinical mask of pity that Jae-hoon would grow to hate more than the pain. The bullet, the one from the shooter who appeared after the crash, severed the spinal cord at the lone vertebra, the doctor said. The impact from the roll drove the fragments deep. "We stabilized you, but the damage is permanent. You will never walk again." 5 words, "You will never walk again." Jae-hoon closed his eyes, and in that moment he wished the car had exploded. In his world, a man who couldn't walk was a man who couldn't lead. A predator who couldn't hunt was just meat for the next in line. Seo-yoon arrived 2 hours later. She was wearing Chanel, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was going to a gala, not a bedside. She held a bouquet of white lilies, the flowers of the dead. "Oh, Jae-hoon," she sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. She didn't take his hand. She didn't offer a hug. She just smoothed the sheet over his useless legs. "This is so complicated." "Complicated?" Jae-hoon stared at her, the fog of the drugs clearing enough for him to see the truth in her eyes. "I've been betrayed, Seo-yoon. Min-ho left me there to burn. He's the one who did this." "I know," she said softly. She was looking at her nails, not him. "We've talked. Min-ho and he thinks it's best if you retire. The organization needs a face that can stand, Jae-hoon, a leader who can move. I'm taking over the shipping accounts. For your sake, of course, to keep you comfortable in your condition." Jae-hoon felt the ice settle in his chest, colder than the hospital air. You're working with the man who tried to murder me. You're sleeping with the dog who bit my hand." "Don't be dramatic," she whispered, leaning in so the scent of her expensive perfume filled his lungs, masking the smell of blood. "You're lucky I'm staying at all. Most women of my stature would have filed for divorce the second the doctor said permanent. Just rest. I'll handle the business. I'll handle everything." Coming home to the penthouse wasn't a homecoming. It was an eviction from his own life. The ramps they had installed over the Italian marble stairs were an insult. The metal bars in the bathroom were a mockery. For 2 months, Jae-hoon watched his world shrink from the size of a city to the size of a single room. Seo-yoon stopped sleeping in their bedroom within a week. The wheelchair tracks ruined the hand-tufted rug, she had said with a look of disgust. She fired the old staff, the people who knew him since the beginning, the guards who had taken bullets for him. She replaced them with new faces, people who worked for her, people who looked at Jae-hoon like he was a ghost that refused to leave the attic. And then came the day she walked into his ground-floor office with a suitcase and a travel coat. "I'm leaving for Singapore, Jae-hoon," she said, her voice echoing in the empty hall. "Min-ho and I are merging the assets into a new holding company. It's cleaner this way. It's better for the shareholders. Merging the assets." He roared, or tried to, his voice breaking as he tried to push himself up, only to feel the pathetic weight of his legs dragging him back down into the chair. "You're stealing my company. You're looting the hoard I built for 20 years. I'm saving what's left from a liability," she sneered, her eyes finally showing the venom underneath the porcelain. "You're a debt on the ledger now, Jae-hoon. I've liquidated the local accounts. I left enough for the rent on this place and a nurse from the agency. After that, well, I hope you have a good memory of how it used to feel to be important." She didn't look back. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and for the first time in his life, the director was truly alone. That was 3 days ago. The house staff she'd hired left that same night. They weren't being paid anymore, and they didn't owe a crippled man any loyalty. They followed the money, taking the silver and the small electronics with them. All of them left, except for the new girl, the one the agency had sent right before the final blow. Nia. Back in the bathroom at 3 a.m., Jae-hoon looked at her, really looked at her. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his voice shaking with the effort of not breaking down completely. "The payroll is dead. The bank accounts are empty. She took the gold, Nia. She took everything but the air." Nia leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. My contract is with the agency, not your wife. And the agency is paid through the end of the month. She stepped forward, her presence filling the small, clinical space. But that's not why I'm here, Mr. Kang. Then why? Why stay for a man who can't even stand up to thank you? Nia looked at him with eyes that had seen things he couldn't imagine, eyes that held a history of their own wars. My father was a construction foreman in Atlanta, she said. A crane snapped on a windy Tuesday. A steel beam came down, paralyzed from the waist up. I was 18. My mother, she couldn't handle the burden. She said she didn't sign up for a life of being a servant. She left within a week. Took the savings, took the car, and took her wedding ring. Jae-hoon went still, the rage in him momentarily silenced by her story. I watched my father give up, Nia continued, her voice hardening. He sat in that chair and let the world die around him. He rotted because he thought he wasn't a man if he couldn't walk a straight line. I spent 5 years trying to convince him he was wrong. I worked 3 jobs to keep him in that house. I failed. He died of a broken heart before the bedsores could even start. She stepped closer, her hand hovering near the arm of his chair, but she didn't touch him. She gave him the respect of his space. When I walked into this house and saw you, I didn't see a billionaire. I didn't see a mafia boss. I saw him. I saw a man with a dragon's heart trying to die in a cardboard box because he's waiting for permission to live. I'm not letting that happen again, not on my watch, not while I still have breath in my lungs. Jae-hoon looked at the pill bottle. He looked at Nia's hand. He realized she wasn't looking at a cripple. She was looking at a soldier who had been knocked down and was waiting for someone to hand him his rifle. I can't pay you, Nia, he whispered, the truth tasting like ash. I don't care about your paper money, she said. Now, are we going to pick up those pills and get to work, or are we going to wait for the cleaners to find your body? Because if you want to die, do it on your feet, even if I have to hold you up. Jae-hoon reached out. He didn't take the pills. He grabbed Nia's forearm. Her skin was warm, her grip was like iron. He felt a jolt of energy pass between them, a spark of life he thought he'd lost in the wreckage of the Mercedes. Help me back to the office, he said, his voice regaining that familiar, commanding edge. Why the office? Nia asked, already moving to get behind the chair. Because Seo-yoon is a fool, Jae-hoon said, a dark, dangerous grin spreading across his face for the first time in months. She thinks she liquidated everything. She thinks she found the bottom of the well, but she never knew about the basement. She never knew about the vault beneath the wine cellar that doesn't exist on any blueprint. Nia's eyebrows shot up. A vault. The dragon always has a hoard, he whispered. She took the clean money. She took the digital accounts. She took the things that leave a trail. But she forgot that I built this empire on the things that don't leave a paper trail. She forgot that I started with nothing, and I know how to hide the treasure. They rolled into the office. Jae-hoon directed her to a specific panel behind a row of ancient leather-bound books. He entered a complex code on a hidden keypad, hidden behind the spine of a book on maritime law. The wall groaned, a heavy, mechanical sound, and slid back to reveal a small, private elevator that Nia hadn't seen in all her weeks of cleaning. Down, he commanded. The basement was a fortress. It was lined with servers, cold and humming in the subterranean chill. And in the center was a steel door that required a thumbprint, a retina scan, and a voice command. When the locks disengaged, the light hit stacks of currency from 4 different continents. Gold bullion that glittered like the sun. Passports. And a row of high-end surveillance monitors that were still drawing power from a dedicated backup generator. Jae-hoon wheeled himself to the monitors. He typed a few commands, his fingers flying across the keys with the muscle memory of a predator. The screens flickered to life, showing feeds from across the city. He wasn't looking at his company. He was looking at a hidden camera in a luxury condo in Gangnam. There she was. Seo-yoon. She was laughing, a glass of crystal-clear champagne in her hand. And there was Minho, his hand on her waist, looking at a map of Jae-hoon's shipping routes like they were a birthday cake he was about to eat. They think I'm rotting in my own waste, Jae-hoon said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that made the hair on Nia's neck stand up. They think they've won the war because they took the horse. Nia looked at the screen, then back at the man in the chair. He didn't look broken anymore. He looked like a volcano that had been dormant for 1,000 years, finally feeling the magma rise. So, what's the plan, Director? She asked, crossing her arms. Jae-hoon turned to her. He reached into a drawer in the vault desk and pulled out a heavy, black handgun. He checked the magazine, the metal clicking into place with a lethal finality. He laid it on his lap. First, he said, we secure the gold. Then, we find the people who are still loyal to the name Kang, not the money Minho is handing out. He looked Nia dead in the eye. You said you wanted to help me. You said you weren't going to let me rot. Do you know what you're signing up for? This isn't nursing, Nia. This is war. I was a combat medic before I became a caregiver, Jae-hoon, she said, her voice devoid of fear. I've patched up holes in people in places you can't find on a map. I know how to move in the dark. I know how to blend in. And I know how to hit the pressure points that make a giant fall. A slow, lethal smile touched Jae-hoon's lips. Then we start tonight. Tomorrow, Seoul will wake up and think the dragon is dead. The news will report on the liquidation of Kang Logistics. But by next week, they're going to feel the heat of a fire they didn't know was still burning. He picked up a gold bar, heavy, solid, and certain, and tossed it onto the desk. Consider this your first paycheck, Nia. We're going to take back my city. And we're going to make them wish they had stayed in that car to make sure I was dead. Damn, the dragon is awake. If you're loving this energy, if you're rooting for Jae-hoon and Nia to tear it all down and leave nothing but ashes, you need to let me know. Smash that like button. Hit subscribe to Afro-K Dark Diaries. We tell the stories that stay in the shadows. And tell me in the comments, if you were Jae-hoon, what is the first thing you would do to get revenge on someone who left you for dead? I'm reading every single comment. The basement was cold, but the air inside the vault felt like it was humming with a different kind of electricity. It was the hum of untapped power. The hum of a sleeping giant finally opening its eyes. Jae-hoon sat in his wheelchair, the black handgun resting heavy on his lap, his gaze fixed on the bank of monitors. On the screens, the city of Seoul continued to move, indifferent to the fact that its Shadow King was plotting his resurrection. Nia Reed stood behind him, her arms crossed, her eyes tracking the same movements. She didn't look at the stacks of gold bars that could buy a small island. She didn't look at the piles of currency that could fund a revolution. She looked at the man. She saw the way his shoulders had squared. She saw the way the fog of the drugs had finally cleared from his eyes, replaced by a clarity that was sharper than any blade. Jae-hoon broke the silence first. His voice was a low vibration in the small, reinforced room. They think they can just erase me, he said, gesturing toward the screen where Minho was seen entering a high-end club. They think the director is just a title you can peel off a door. They forgot that the title didn't make me. I made the title. He turned the chair to face Nia. The gold bullion on the desk behind him caught the light, casting a metallic glow over his sharp features. Why did you stay, Nia? Really, you have enough gold in your hand right now to never work another day in your life. You could walk out that door, catch a flight back to Atlanta, and forget this city ever existed. Nia didn't blink. She didn't look at the gold bar he had tossed her. Because I don't like unfinished business, Mr. Kang, she said. And because I know what happens when you let people like Minho win. They don't just take the money. They take the soul of the city. My father let the world die around him. I'm not watching you do the same. A flicker of something, respect, maybe even warmth, passed through Jae-hoon's eyes. Then the mask of the director snapped back into place. Good, he said, because the woman you saw on that screen, Seo-yoon, she's not just my wife. She's the key to their entire operation. Minho has the muscle, but Seo-yoon has the signatures. She knows where the legitimate money is buried. If we want to take them down, we have to cut the head off the snake and the hand off the ledger at the same time. He wheeled himself back to the servers. I need you to be my ghost, Nia. You're invisible to them. To Seo-yoon, you're just the help she hired to watch her problem rot. To Minho, you don't even exist. That is our greatest weapon. What's the first move? Nia asked, stepping closer to the monitors. Information, Jae-hoon said. Minho is holding a meeting tomorrow night at the docks, Warehouse 42. He's going to try to convince the union bosses that I'm dead or incapacitated, and that he's the new voice of Kang Logistics. If he gets them to sign, the transition is complete. I'll be in exile in my own empire. I can get in there, Nia said. I can blend in. No, Jae-hoon said, his voice sharpening. Not yet. First, we need to fix the engine. He looked down at his legs. I can't lead a war from a chair if I can't even move myself from the bed to the bath. You said you were a medic. You said you've seen holes in people. I have, Nia said. Then patch me up, Nia. Not the spine. I know the spine is gone, but patch up the spirit. Get my arms strong enough to carry the weight of this war. Get my mind sharp enough to outrun them. If I'm going to be a dragon again, I need to learn how to fly without wings. The next 2 weeks were a descent into a different kind of hell. The penthouse gym, once a place of vanity, became a torture chamber. Nia didn't go easy on him. She didn't offer a gentle hand or a sympathetic smile. She treated him like a recruit in basic training. She used the resistance bands from the medical kit, the heavy books from the office, and the sheer weight of his own frustration. Again, she would shout as Jaehoon struggled to lift himself using only his triceps. His face would turn a violent shade of purple, his veins popping in his neck, his tattoos stretching over straining muscle. "I can't," he would roar, his arms shaking so hard the wheelchair would rattle. "Then die," Nia would snap back. "Die right here on the mat and let Minho have your bed. Let Seo-yoon wear your mother's pearls while she laughs at your funeral. Is that what you want, director?" Jaehoon would scream, a raw, guttural sound of pure defiance, and he would push. He would lift. He would conquer the inch. Every day, the distance between the floor and the chair became a little less like a mountain and a little more like a hurdle. By the end of the second week, Jaehoon's upper body had transformed. The gauntness was gone, replaced by a dense, hard-packed muscle. His hands, once soft from years of signing checks, were now calloused from the wheels of the chair and the floor mats. He moved with a new kind of economy, a predatory grace that didn't need legs to be felt. But while the dragon was training in the dark, the wolves were feasting in the light. On the monitors in the vault, they watched the liquidation of Jaehoon's life. They saw Minho moving into the secondary office. They saw Seo-yoon at charity galas, draped in new diamonds, her smile wider than it had ever been. She looked relieved, she looked free. One evening, Nia was preparing a meal of high-protein stew when she saw Jaehoon staring at a specific feed. It was a hidden camera in the master bedroom of a luxury villa Jaehoon owned on the outskirts of the city. On the screen, Seo-yoon and Minho were sitting on the edge of the bed, a bottle of vintage champagne between them. "He's so pathetic," Seo-yoon was saying, her voice echoing through the vault speakers. "I saw him last week before I left. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He just sat there in that chair, smelling like a hospital." Minho laughed, his hand sliding over her shoulder. "The dragon is a worm now, Seo, a worm in an expensive suit. Don't worry. The final papers will be ready by Friday. Once he signs over the Singapore accounts, we can put him in a home and forget he ever existed." Jaehoon's expression didn't change as he watched them. He didn't yell. He didn't hit anything. He just reached out and turned the volume down until there was only silence. "Friday," he whispered. "They think they have until Friday." Nia set the bowl of stew down in front of him. "They're moving fast, Jaehoon." "Because they're arrogant," he said. "Arrogance makes you blind. They think they've already won because they took the board. They don't realize I'm playing a different game now." He looked up at Nia. "It's time for you to go out." "Where?" "The Blue Anchor," Jaehoon said. "It's a dive bar near the Incheon docks. It's where the older dockworkers go. The ones who remember when I was just a kid carrying crates. There's a man named Mr. Choi. He was my father's friend. He's the only one Minho couldn't buy because Choi has no price. What do I tell him?" "Tell him the dragon is breathing again," Jaehoon said. "Tell him I need the Invisibles." "The Invisibles?" "The men the company forgot," Jaehoon explained. "The retired guards, the ones who took the payouts and went home. They don't owe Minho anything and they don't fear the new regime. If Choi says the word, they'll move." Nia nodded. She felt the weight of the mission. She was no longer just the caregiver. She was the emissary of a ghost. The Blue Anchor was exactly what it sounded like, a dark, smoke-filled hole in the wall that smelled of salt water, cheap tobacco, and old regrets. Nia walked in, her presence immediately drawing eyes. A black woman in a place like this was a rarity, an anomaly in a sea of weathered Korean faces and heavy wool coats. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the bar. "I'm looking for Mr. Choi," she said to the bartender. The bartender didn't look up from the glass he was cleaning. Never heard of him. Nia leaned in, her voice dropping to that low, dangerous tone she had used on Jaehoon in the bathroom. "Tell him Nia Reed is here. Tell him I have a message from a friend in the penthouse." The bartender's hand stilled. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. He disappeared into the back room for a long minute. When he returned, he jerked his head toward a booth in the far, dark corner. "He's waiting." Mr. Choi was a man who looked like he was carved out of driftwood. His face was a map of deep lines and scars, his eyes two dark coals hidden under bushy gray eyebrows. He was drinking a small glass of soju, his hands steady as a rock. Nia sat across from him. She didn't waste time. "He's alive," she said, "and he's awake." Choi didn't move. "I heard he was a broken man," the old man said, his voice like gravel. "I heard he was waiting for the end in a golden cage." "He was," Nia admitted, "but the fire didn't go out. It just went underground. He needs the invisibles, Mr. Choi. He needs the people who remember what loyalty means." Choi took a slow sip of his soju. "Minho is a dangerous dog," he said. "He has the police in his pocket and the triads at his back. Why should we risk our peace for a man who can't even stand up to greet us?" "Because he's the only one who can stop what's coming," Nia said. "You know Minho. You know what he'll do to the docks once the last of the director's influence is gone. He'll sell the union out to the highest bidder. He'll turn Incheon into a graveyard for anyone who doesn't bow." Choi was silent for a long time. The bar buzzed around them, but the booth felt isolated, a pocket of history in the middle of a changing world. "He used to be a good boy," Choi whispered, almost to himself. "Jae-hoon, he had a heart for the people." Before the diamonds and the model wife took his eyes off the ground. "He's looking at the ground now, Mr. Choi," Nia said softly. "He's been on it for 3 months. He sees everything clearly now." Choi looked at her, really looked at her. "You're the one the agency sent? The American?" "I am. You don't look like a nurse," Choi observed. "I was a combat medic in the 101st Airborne," Nia said. "I've seen better men than Jae-hoon fall, and I've seen worse men rise. I'm not here for the paycheck. I'm here because the wrong people are winning." Choi let out a short, sharp laugh. "I like you, American. You have iron in your blood." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, tarnished brass coin. It had the image of a dragon stamped on one side and a ship's wheel on the other. "Take this to him," Choi said. "Tell him the Invisibles will be at the old cannery at midnight on Thursday. But tell him this, if he shows up and he's still a ghost, we walk away. We only follow a leader who is ready to bleed with us." Nia took the coin. "I'll tell him." She walked out of the bar, the cold Incheon wind hitting her face. She felt the weight of the coin in her pocket. It was the first piece of the new empire. But as she walked toward the subway, she noticed a black sedan idling at the corner. The windows were tinted. The engine was humming. She didn't speed up. She didn't run. She kept her pace steady, her eyes scanning the street for an exit. Brooklyn habits, Atlanta training. She felt the adrenaline start to surge, that familiar hum in her veins that meant a fight was coming. The sedan door opened. A man stepped out. He was young, wearing a slim-fit suit and a wireless earpiece. He didn't look like a thug, he looked like a professional. "Miss Reed?" he asked, his tone polite but empty. Nia stopped. "Who's asking?" "Mr. Minho would like a word," the man said. "He's concerned about the director's care. He's heard that you've been venturing out of the penthouse." Nia smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "It's a free country, isn't it? Or does Minho own the sidewalks now too?" The man didn't react. He just gestured toward the open car door. "Please, it will only take a moment. We'd hate for there to be any misunderstanding with the agency." Nia looked at the car. She looked at the man. She could see the bulge of a holster under his jacket. She could see a second man in the driver's seat, his hand resting near the center console. She had a choice. She could fight them here, in the street, and risk being arrested before she could get back to Jae-hoon. Or she could play the game. She stepped toward the car. "I've always wanted to see how the other half lives," she said, sliding into the leather interior. The car smelled of expensive cologne and ozone. Minho was sitting in the back, his phone in his hand. He didn't look up as the car pulled away from the curb. "You're a long way from Gangnam, Nia," he said, his voice smooth and casual. "The Blue Anchor is a rough place for a woman like you." "I like rough places," Nia said. "They're more honest than penthouses." Minho finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, calculating, like a snake deciding if the prey was worth the energy to kill. "Jae-hoon was a great man once," Minho said. "He taught me everything I know. But the world moved on, Nia. The accident was a tragedy, but it was also an evolution. A man who can't stand can't lead. It's nature. Is that what you call it?" Nia asked. "Evolution? I call it a car crash and a coward who wouldn't pull the door open." Minho's jaw tightened, just for a second. The truth stung, even if he didn't want to admit it. "I'm paying your agency a lot of money to make sure he's comfortable, Nia. Not to have you running errands in Incheon. What did Choi give you?" Nia leaned back, her hand surreptitiously gripping the coin in her pocket. "Just some advice," she said. "He's an old man. He likes to talk about the good old days." Minho leaned forward, his face inches from hers. Don't lie to me, Nia. I know Jae-hoon has stashes, I know he has people. But they're old, they're tired, and they're outnumbered. If you're smart, you'll take a payout from me and walk away. You don't want to be in the room when the dragon finally stops breathing. Is that a threat? It's a prediction, Min-ho said. He signaled the driver. The car pulled over to the side of the road. Get out, Nia. Go back to the penthouse. Clean the floors. Give him his pills, and stay out of the shadows. The next time I see you in Incheon, you won't be getting a ride back. Nia stepped out of the car. She watched the black sedan pull away, disappearing into the neon haze. Her heart was hammering, but her mind was clear. Min-ho was scared. He wouldn't have picked her up if he wasn't. He wouldn't have threatened her if he didn't feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. The invisibles were real, and Min-ho knew it. She made it back to the penthouse 2 hours later. Jae-hoon was waiting in the vault, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitors. "You're late," he said. "I had a meeting," Nia replied, tossing the brass coin onto the desk. Jae-hoon picked up the coin. He looked at it, then at Nia. "What happened?" "Min-ho picked me up," she said. "He knows I was at the anchor. He knows you're trying to move." Jae-hoon's eyes narrowed. "Did he hurt you?" "No, he just talked. He's nervous, Jae-hoon. He's trying to consolidate everything by Friday, but he's worried about the invisibles." Jae-hoon let out a short, dry laugh. He should be. He looked at the coin again. "Thursday at midnight. The cannery." "We can't both go," Nia said. "You're too recognizable. If they see a wheelchair entering that building, it's over." "I'm not sending you alone," Jae-hoon said. "You have to," Nia countered. "I'm the ghost, remember? I'll go in, I'll vet the men, I'll set the meeting point. You'll be on the radio, guiding me." Jae-hoon stared at her. He hated the idea. He was a man who led from the front, a man who took the risks himself. But he looked at his legs, then at Nia's steady gaze, and he knew she was right. "This is the new reality," he whispered. "Yes, it is," Nia said. Thursday night arrived with a heavy fog that rolled off the Incheon harbor, swallowing the docks in a thick, gray blanket. It was the perfect weather for ghosts. The old cannery was a sprawling, rusted ruin on the edge of the water. The windows were long gone, the brickwork crumbling under the weight of decades of salt air. It felt like a place that time had forgotten, which made it the perfect sanctuary for the invisibles. Nia approached the building, her footsteps silent on the damp concrete. She was wearing her dark tracksuit, her hair tucked under a beanie. She looked like just another shadow in the fog. In her ear, a tiny wireless piece crackled. "I see 3 cars in the perimeter," Jae-hoon's voice said, sounding clear despite the distance. He was watching through a high-altitude drone he had launched from the penthouse roof. 2 guards at the north entrance, 1 on the roof. "They're professional, Nia. Watch your angles. I see them," Nia whispered. She moved along the side of the building, using the rusted machinery for cover. She reached the side door, the one Choi had described. She gave the signal, 3 taps, a pause, then 1 heavy strike. The door opened. A man stood there. He was in his 50s, wearing a heavy coat and holding a shotgun. He looked at Nia, his eyes hard. "The coin," he said. Nia held out the brass coin. The man took it, felt the weight, and nodded. Inside. The cannery was a cavernous space, the air smelling of old fish and damp earth. In the center, under a single hanging light bulb, stood a group of men. There were maybe 20 of them. All ages, all sizes. Some were in their 30s, looking like active enforcers. Others were older, with gray hair and the quiet dignity of veterans. Mr. Choi was at the center. He saw Nia and stepped forward. "Where is he?" Choi asked. "He's listening," Nia said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, high-powered speaker. She placed it on a crate in the middle of the circle. "Director?" The speakers crackled. Then Jae-hoon's voice filled the room. It was different than it had been in the vault. It was the voice of the dragon. "Brothers," Jae-hoon said, "I know what you've heard. I know you've been told that the dragon is dead. I know you've seen Min-ho and Seo-yoon carving up the city like it was theirs to take." The men were silent, their eyes fixed on the small speaker. "I am paralyzed," Jae-hoon continued. "My legs will never walk the docks again. That is the truth, but my mind is still here. My heart is still here, and my memory of what we built together is still here." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Min-ho thinks he can buy your silence. He thinks he can use your loyalty like a commodity. He's wrong. He's a parasite who thinks he's a predator. He left me to burn in that car. He left his own brother to die. If he'll do that to me, what do you think he'll do to you once the transition is complete?" A murmur went through the crowd. The truth of it was undeniable. "I'm not asking you to take a bullet for a cripple," Jae-hoon said. "I'm asking you to defend your home. I'm asking you to help me take back the city so we can rebuild it with honor. I have the gold. I have the plan. All I need is the steel." Mr. Choi looked around the circle. He saw the faces of the men. He saw the anger. He saw the hope. He looked at the speaker. "We're with you, Director," Choi said, "but we need a sign. We need to know that this isn't just a ghost story." "Look at the north gate," Jae-hoon said. At that exact moment, the north gate of the cannery exploded in a shower of sparks and smoke. Everyone ducked. Through the smoke, a small, black-armored vehicle burst into the room. It was remote-controlled, a prototype from Jae-hoon's tech division that Min-ho had overlooked. It stopped in front of the circle, and the top hatch opened. Inside were 20 black tactical cases. "Open them," Jae-hoon said. Choi opened the first case. It was filled with high-end communication gear, encrypted tablets, and heavy-duty weaponry. "The sign has been given," Choi said, his voice ringing through the cannery. "The dragon is awake." The men let out a roar, a sound of pure, primal loyalty that echoed off the rusted walls. Nia stood in the shadows, watching the scene. She felt a shiver of excitement. The army was ready. The pieces were in place. But as she looked toward the entrance, she saw something that made her heart stop. A tiny, red laser dot was dancing on Mr. Choi's chest. "Sniper," Nia screamed, throwing herself toward the old man. The first shot rang out, a sharp crack that shattered the single light bulb. The room plunged into darkness. "Nia," Jae-hoon's voice screamed through her earpiece. "Nia, report." The cannery erupted in chaos. Gunfire flashed in the dark, illuminating the terrified faces of the men and the muzzle flares of the attackers. "They're here," Nia shouted into her radio, dragging Mr. Choi behind a row of metal vats. Min-ho sent a hit squad. The air was filled with the sound of lead hitting metal and the screams of the wounded. Min-ho hadn't waited until Friday. He had followed Nia. He had used her to find the invisibles. "I'm coming to get you, Nia," Jae-hoon shouted. "No," Nia yelled, ducking as a bullet whistled over her head. "Stay in the vault. If you come out, they'll kill you. I'm not letting you die," Jae-hoon roared. Nia looked around the dark room. She saw the invisibles scrambling for cover, their new weapons still in the crates. She saw the silhouettes of the attackers moving through the smoke, their NVG goggles glowing like demonic eyes. She looked at Mr. Choi, who was bleeding from a graze on his arm. "We have to fight our way out," Nia said, her voice calm and steady. She reached for the handgun she had tucked into her waistband. "Choice 1, Mr. Choi," she said, mirroring the words she had used on Jae-hoon. "We die here in the dark." "Choice 2, Choi growled, grabbing his shotgun. "We show them how the invisibles fight." The battle for the cannery had begun. And the dragon was watching it all through the eyes of a drone, helpless in his golden cage, listening to the woman he was starting to care about fight for her life in the dark. Stay tuned, family. The war has moved from the shadows to the streets, and the director is about to find out that sometimes, to save the queen, you have to burn the entire board. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below. What would you do if you were trapped in that cannery? I'm reading them all. The darkness in the cannery didn't just feel cold. It felt heavy, like the fog outside had crept through the bullet holes and settled in everyone's lungs. 1 second, there was a roar of loyalty. The next, only the sound of blood hitting the floor and the staccato rhythm of automatic gunfire. Nia Reed didn't think. She didn't have the luxury of fear. Her combat medic training from the 101st Airborne didn't just kick in, it took over her entire nervous system. She stayed low, her mahogany skin blending into the deep shadows of the metal vats, her eyes scanning for muzzle flashes. The single light bulb had been a target, and the hit squad was professional enough to know that in the dark, the man with the night vision goggles is the king of the world. In her ear, Jae-hoon's voice was a jagged edge of panic and rage. Nia, talk to me. I've lost the drone feed. There's too much smoke. Nia, if you can hear me, get out of there." Nia pressed the talkback button on her collar. "Stay focused, Director," she hissed, her voice a calm contrast to his storm. "Choice 1, we panic and die. Choice 2, you get that drone back online and tell me where the shooters are positioned. I need eyes, Jae-hoon. Now." There was a beat of silence on the other end. She could almost hear him breathing, imagining him in that vault, gripping the armrests of his chair so hard the metal groaned. Then, the architect returned. "Copy that, Nia. Drone rebooting. I'm switching to thermal. Give me 10 seconds. 10 seconds is an eternity when lead is flying through the air." Nia looked over at Mr. Choi. The old man was slumped against a rusted gear housing, his shotgun held tight to his chest. He was breathing in shallow, wet gasps. The laser dot that had danced on his chest earlier was gone, but the damage was done. "Choi, look at me," Nia whispered, pulling a field dressing from her tracksuit pocket. She didn't need a lamp to know he was hit. She could smell the iron in the air. "I'm fine, American," Choi wheezed, even though his face was a ghostly gray. "Just a scratch. Don't let them take the director's steel." "They aren't taking anything," Nia said. She worked by touch, her fingers finding the sticky warmth on his shoulder. It was a clean through and through. Not fatal, but it would bleed him dry if they didn't move. "Nia," Jaehoon's voice crackled back, colder now. "Sharper. Thermal is up. You have 4 shooters. 2 at the main entrance, 12 o'clock. 1 on the catwalk, 3 o'clock. And the last one is circling the perimeter to the west. He's looking for the side exit." Nia's eyes flickered to the western wall. That was where the Invisibles were huddled, waiting for a command. If that shooter got the angle, it would be a slaughter. "The Invisibles," Nia shouted over the noise. "Crate 4, flashbangs, use them now." One of the younger men, a former security lead named Tiho, dove for the tactical case. He ripped it open, grabbed 2 silver canisters, and hurled them toward the main entrance. The world turned white. The bang wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow that rattled the windows and sent a cloud of ancient dust raining down from the rafters. The attackers, even with their high-end gear, weren't prepared for a localized sun exploding in their faces. "Catwalk," Jaehoon roared in her ear. "Nia, he's recovering. 3 o'clock, hi." Nia didn't aim like a civilian. She didn't close one eye and pray. She raised her handgun, felt the weight of it in her palm, and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession toward the thermal signature Jaehoon described. A heavy thud followed. A body hit the concrete floor from 20 feet up. Silence reclaimed the cannery for a heartbeat. "Move," Nia yelled, grabbing Mr. Choi by his good arm. "To the south exit. Tiho, cover the rear." They moved like a single organism, a shadow flowing through the fog. The Invisibles didn't leave their wounded. They dragged their brothers through the dark, their boots splashing in the oily puddles on the floor. Jaehoon's voice was a steady hum now, guiding them through the maze of the shipyard. "Turn left at the rusted crane. There's a transport van waiting 2 blocks down. I've overridden the GPS. It's a clean ghost. Welcome back to Afro-K Dark Diaries, family. If your heart is beating out of your chest right now, you aren't alone. We are in the middle of a war where the general can't walk and the queen is a medic from the south side who refuses to let the king fall. This isn't a movie. This is the reality of the soul underworld when the dragon decides he's had enough of the cage. If you're rooting for Nia and Jaehoon, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button, do it now. We're going to see this through to the very last bullet. The transport van was a nondescript white box truck. Inside, it was a mobile surgical unit and a communications hub. Nia slammed the doors shut, and the driver, another of the Invisibles who had been waiting in the fog, peeled away from the docks, the tires screaming on the wet asphalt. Nia immediately went to work on the wounded. She didn't look at the monitors, showing the hit squad searching the empty cannery. She didn't look at the drone footage of Minho's sedan speeding away from the scene. She focused on the pulse under her fingers. "You did good, Choi," Nia said, cinching a tourniquet. The old man managed a weak smile. "I haven't had this much fun since the '98 riots," he whispered. Nia cleaned the wounds, her hands steady, her face a mask of clinical focus. But inside, she was vibrating. The adrenaline was starting to crash, and the weight of what just happened was settling in. They had almost died. If it hadn't been for the drone, if it hadn't been for the flashbangs, the Invisibles would be a memory. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Tiho. "The director wants to talk to you," he said, handing her a tablet. Jaehoon's face filled the screen. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last hour. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He was still in his wheelchair, but he was leaned so far forward he was almost out of it. "Nia," he said, the word was a prayer. "I'm here, Jaehoon. We're all here. We lost 2 men, but Choi is stable." Jaehoon closed his eyes for a moment, a flicker of grief crossing his features. "I should have been there," he whispered. "No, you shouldn't," Nia said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be. You were the eyes. Without you, we would have been walking into a meat grinder." Jaehoon looked at her, his gaze lingering on the smear of blood on her cheek. "Minho tried to take you from me, Nia. He tried to kill the only thing in this city that I actually trust." He leaned back, his expression hardening into something cold and terrifying, something the city of Seoul hadn't seen in a very long time. Friday is too far away, Jae-hoon said. The transition stops tonight. What are you going to do? Nia asked. Seo-yoon is at the Grand Hyatt, Jae-hoon said. She's hosting a celebration for the new board of Kang Logistics. Min-ho will be there. The Triad representatives will be there. They think they're celebrating a coronation. He looked at the tactical cases in the truck. I'm going to give them a funeral instead. Jae-hoon, you can't go there, Nia said. Security will be impenetrable. I'm not going there as a guest, Nia. I'm going there as the owner. He typed something into his console. On the tablet, a new set of blueprints appeared. It was the Grand Hyatt. But it wasn't the floor plan the public saw. It was the service tunnels, the freight elevators, the HVAC systems. I built that hotel, Jae-hoon said. Every bolt, every wire, every hidden passage. Min-ho thinks he knows the building because he stayed in the penthouse. He doesn't know the bones. He looked at Nia. I need the invisibles to secure the perimeter. But I need you, Nia. I need you to get me into that ballroom. In a wheelchair? Nia asked. Jae-hoon pointed to a crate in the corner of the truck that Nia hadn't noticed. It was long, narrow, and made of reinforced carbon fiber. T-ho, open the prototype, Jae-hoon commanded. T-ho opened the crate. Inside was a piece of technology that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film. It was an exoskeleton, a sleek, lightweight frame designed to be worn over the legs and torso. It's a project from my R&D division, Jae-hoon explained. It was supposed to be for warehouse workers, to help them lift heavy cargo. It's battery-powered, controlled by neurological sensors in the spine. He looked at his legs. It won't make me walk like a normal man, Nia. It's clunky, it's loud, and it's agonizing to wear for more than an hour. But it will let me stand. It will let me look Min-ho in the eye when I tell him he's finished. Nia looked at the machine, then at the man. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the need to reclaim his dignity, to prove to the world and to himself that he wasn't a ghost. I'm a medic, Jae-hoon, she said. I can't let you put that on. The strain on your severed nerves? It could kill you. The neurological feedback could cause a seizure. Then let me die as the director, he said, not as a man waiting for his nurse to change his dressing. Nia stared at him. She thought of her father. She thought of the way he had withered away because he didn't have a reason to fight. She looked at Jae-hoon and saw a man who had found his reason. Choice 1, she whispered. We stay safe and lose everything. Choice 2, Jae-hoon finished. We burn it down. Nia sighed, her heart heavy but certain. Get the truck to the penthouse, she told the driver. We have a king to dress for his final battle. The next 3 hours were a blur of metal and pain. Nia spent the time at the penthouse, not as a caregiver, but as an engineer of war. She helped Jae-hoon strap into the exoskeleton. The machine whirred as the sensors calibrated to his nervous system. Jae-hoon's face was a mask of agony as the neurological interfaces tapped into the base of his spine. His muscles spasmed, his tattoos rippling as the electricity surged through the frame. Easy, Jae-hoon, Nia said, her hand on his shoulder. Breathe through it. Focus on the heartbeat. I'm fine, he gasped, the sweat pouring down his face. The machine hissed and slowly, agonizingly, the metal legs straightened. Jae-hoon rose from his wheelchair. He stood. He was 6'2" again. He towered over Nia, the exoskeleton humming like a hive of bees. He took a step. It was mechanical, stiff, the sound of metal clicking on marble echoing through the empty penthouse. He reached out and gripped the edge of the desk. His knuckles were white. I'm standing, Nia, he whispered, a tear of pure pain and triumph escaping his eye. You're standing, she said, her own eyes blurring. Now let's make sure you stay that way. Nia dressed him in his finest suit, a deep charcoal three-piece that hid the bulk of the exoskeleton. She adjusted his silk tie, the same way Seo-yoon used to do, but there was no ice in her touch. There was only fire. She checked her own gear. She wasn't wearing a tracksuit anymore. She was in a sleek, black tactical vest over a dark turtleneck. She had her medic kit on her thigh and her handgun at her small of her back. Ready, director? She asked. Jae-hoon picked up his father's cane, a silver-topped piece of ebony that helped him balance the weight of the machine. Let's go to the party, he said. The Grand Hyatt was a fortress of glass and light. The ballroom was filled with the elite of Seoul, men in tuxedos, women in gowns that cost more than a doctor's salary. At the head of the room, Seo-yoon stood on a small stage, a microphone in her hand. Min-ho was beside her, looking smug and untouchable. And so, with the reorganization of Kang Logistics, we enter a new era of prosperity, Seo Yoon said, her voice smooth and practiced. We honor the memory of my husband, who led us so bravely until his tragic accident. But the future belongs to those who can move forward. She raised a glass of champagne. To the new era, the crowd echoed. But before the first sip could be taken, the massive double doors at the back of the ballroom exploded inward. Not with a bomb, but with the force of a man who refused to stay dead. The music stopped. The chatter died. The socialites parted like the Red Sea as a figure emerged from the smoke and the shadows. It was Jae-hoon. He walked slowly, the rhythmic click-hiss of the exoskeleton muffled by the thick carpet, but still audible in the sudden silence. He leaned on his cane, his face a mask of cold, lethal marble. Nia walked half a step behind him, her eyes scanning the room, her hand near her weapon. She looked like a shadow, a silent guardian of the man in the charcoal suit. Seo Yoon dropped her glass. It shattered on the stage, the expensive champagne splashing onto her red dress. "Jae-hoon?" she whispered, her face turning a sickly shade of white. Min-ho took a step back, his hand instinctively going to his waistband. You should be in a home, you can't walk." Jae-hoon stopped at the edge of the stage. He didn't use a microphone. His voice carried through the ballroom like a crack of thunder. "The dragon doesn't need to walk to burn a traitor, Min-ho," Jae-hoon said. Min-ho recovered his composure, his face twisting into a snarl. "You're a freak. You're wearing a machine. You think this changes anything? The board has already signed. The company is mine." Jae-hoon looked around the room. He saw the triad representatives. He saw the union bosses. He saw the men who had bowed to him for 20 years and then turned their backs the second he was in a chair. "The board signed a contract with Seo Yoon, acting as my power of attorney," Jae-hoon said. "But a power of attorney is only valid if the principal is incapacitated." He stepped onto the stage. Each step was a struggle, a battle of will over metal and pain. He stood inches from Min-ho. "Do I look incapacitated to you?" Min-ho lunged for his gun, but Nia was faster. She didn't draw her weapon. She stepped forward, gripped Min-ho's wrist, and used a military-grade joint lock to bring him to his knees. The sound of his radius snapping echoed through the ballroom. Min-ho screamed, his face hitting the floorboards. Jae-hoon looked down at his former lieutenant. "You left me to burn, Min-ho. You stole my life and you tried to kill my people." He looked over at Seo Yoon. She was trembling, her porcelain mask completely shattered. "And you," Jae-hoon said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. "You were the poison in my bed. You thought you could sell my soul for a diamond necklace." He turned to the crowd. "My name is Kang Jae-hoon. I am the director of Kang Logistics, and anyone who is still standing on this stage when I count to 3 will be buried with the traitors." The ballroom erupted in chaos. The board members scrambled for the exits. The triad representatives disappeared into the shadows. The socialites fled like rats from a sinking ship. Within minutes, the ballroom was empty. Only Jae-hoon, Nia, the broken Min-ho, and the terrified Seo Yoon remained. Nia released Min-ho, who was curled in a ball, whimpering. She looked at Jae-hoon. The exoskeleton was whirring loudly now, the light on his chest flashing red. "Jae-hoon, the battery," Nia said. "You have 5 minutes." "That's all I need," he said. He looked at Nia, and for a second the director vanished. He was just a man. "Get them out of here, Nia. Give them to Choi and the Invisibles. They know what to do with them. What about you?" "I'm going to sit down, Nia," Jae-hoon said, his legs starting to buckle as the power failed. "I'm going to sit down and watch the sun come up." Nia caught him as the exoskeleton shut off. She lowered him gently into a chair at a nearby table. He was gray, his breathing ragged, but he was alive. "You did it, Jae-hoon," she whispered, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "No," he said, grabbing her hand. "We did it." He looked at the wreckage of the ballroom. "Choice 1, Nia. We stayed in the penthouse and died." "Choice 2, she said, smiling through her tears. "We burned the village down. The war was over. The traitors were in the hands of the Invisibles, and the dragon was back on his throne, even if that throne was a dining chair in a wrecked ballroom." But as Nia looked out the window at the first light of dawn over Seoul, she realized that the rebuilding was just beginning. And she knew, with a certainty that went deeper than any contract, that she wasn't going anywhere. Because when you save a dragon, you don't just get a paycheck. You get a legacy. Now, look at me. If you made it this far, then you know. You know that strength isn't about your legs. It's about your heart. It's about the people who stay when everyone else leaves. If this story moved you, if you felt the fire of the dragon, then do me a favor. Smash that like button. Join the Afro-K Dark Diaries family. We tell the stories of the survivors. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you had 5 minutes of power left? How would you change your world? The silence that followed the storm at the Grand Hyatt was heavier than the darkness that had once filled the penthouse. It wasn't the silence of a grave anymore. It was the silence of a world waiting to be rebuilt. The ringing in everyone's ears, the sound of shattering crystal, the whir of the exoskeleton, and the screams of the traders, slowly faded, replaced by the rhythmic, steady sound of rain tapping against the high windows of the ballroom. Jae-hoon sat in that dining chair, his frame gray and trembling, the exoskeleton now a cold weight of dead metal against his skin. The battery was spent. The fire was still there, but the engine was cold. He looked at his hands, calloused and stained with the grit of the night, and then he looked at Nia. She was standing a few feet away, her tactical vest slightly torn, her mahogany skin glistening with sweat and rain. She didn't look like a nurse. She didn't look like a medic. She looked like the only real thing left in a city made of neon and lies. The invisibles moved like smoke. Within 30 minutes of the confrontation, the Grand Hyatt Ballroom was no longer a crime scene, it was a processing center. T-Ho and the younger guards had secured the perimeter, while Mr. Choi, his shoulder bandaged and his eyes gleaming with a terrifying sort of joy, managed the evacuation of the remaining staff. No police sirens approached. No news crews arrived. Jae-hoon had cut the digital throat of the city's emergency response grid for that sector hours ago. In the world of the director, if a tree falls in a ballroom and he owns the ballroom, it doesn't make a sound until he says it does. Nia walked over to Jae-hoon. She didn't say a word. She knelt between his knees, her fingers moving with that practiced, military efficiency to unbuckle the heavy carbon fiber straps of the exoskeleton. Every click of the metal felt like a physical release for him. When the last strap came loose, Jae-hoon slumped back into the chair, a long, ragged breath escaping his lungs. "Choice one," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the hotel's ventilation. "We let the battery die and I fall on my face." Nia looked up at him, a tired smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Choice two," she said. "I catch you." She helped him back into the backup wheelchair that T-Ho had brought in from the van. It was a simple, manual chair, no motors, no sensors, just wheels and a seat. Jae-hoon felt more powerful in it now than he ever had in the machine, because he wasn't standing on a battery. He was standing on the loyalty of the woman in front of him. "Where are they?" Jae-hoon asked, his eyes turning toward the heavy curtains at the back of the stage. "In the holding room," Nia said, standing up and wiping her hands on her trousers. "Choi is with them. He's reminiscing." Jae-hoon nodded. "Take me there?" The holding room was a small, windowless office used by the hotel's accounting staff. It smelled of stale coffee and fear. Seo-yoon was huddled in a corner chair, her red dress torn, her mother's pearls scattered on the floor like spilled teeth. She wasn't crying anymore. She was vibrating with a silent, crystalline terror. Min-ho was on the floor, his arm in a makeshift sling, his face swollen where Nia had introduced him to the floorboards. When Jae-hoon rolled into the room, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Min-ho tried to scramble backward, but Mr. Choi stepped on the tail of his expensive suit jacket. "Easy, boy," the old man rasped. "The director is speaking." Jae-hoon looked at them both. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. That was worse. Anger is a fire that burns out, disappointment is a cold winter that never ends. 20 years, Min-ho, Jae-hoon said. "I gave you a name. I gave you a life. I let you sleep in the house my father built." Min-ho spat blood onto the carpet. "You gave me a shadow, Jae-hoon. I was always the help. Even when I was second in command, I was just the dog who fetched the dragon's dinner. You became a cripple, you were supposed to die, it was my turn." Jae-hoon didn't flinch. "You think leadership is a turn you take in a game? It's a weight you carry until it breaks your spine. You couldn't even handle the weight of a car door, Min-ho. You ran when it got heavy." He turned his gaze to Seo-yoon. She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy. "Jae-hoon, please, he made me. He told me the triads would kill me if I didn't help him. I was scared." Jae-hoon leaned forward, his hands resting calmly on his lap. "You weren't scared, Seo-yoon. You were bored. You found a man who could walk, and you thought he could take you to places I couldn't reach anymore. You didn't realize that I own the destination." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the power of attorney she had used to liquidate his life. He held it out. Mr. Choi produced a lighter, the flame flickering blue in the dim room. Jae-hoon held the corner of the paper to the flame and watched it curl into black ash. "You are officially a ghost, Seo-yoon," Jae-hoon said. "The bank accounts in Macau, frozen, the villa in Singapore, seized by the local authorities for tax evasion, the diamonds you're wearing. They've already been reported stolen by the insurance company I own." Seo-yoon gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "You can't. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything." "Tell them what?" Nia interjected, stepping forward. She leaned against the doorframe, her presence radiating a lethal sort of boredom. "Tell them you tried to murder your husband. Tell them you conspired with the triads to launder money. We have the recordings, Seo-yoon, every phone call, every laugh in the villa. My agency isn't just for nurses. We specialize in comprehensive care." Nia looked at Jae-hoon. "Choice 1 director. We give them to the authorities and spend the next 10 years in courtrooms." Jae-hoon looked at Min-ho, then at Seo-yoon. He thought of the fire in the car. He thought of the 3 a.m. silence in the penthouse. "Choice 2, Jae-hoon said. "We give them to the docks." Min-ho's eyes went wide. "No, Jae-hoon, not the docks, anything but the docks." In the Incheon underworld, the docks wasn't a place. It was a sentence. It meant working the labor gangs in the deep hull of the cargo ships, the ships that Jae-hoon owned. No name, no identity. Just 12 hours of shifting iron in the heat, sleeping in the hold, and knowing that the man who owned your soul was watching through every camera. "Take them away," Jae-hoon commanded. Mr. Choi and Tae-ho grabbed them. There was no more talking, just the sound of boots dragging on carpet and the heavy thud of the service elevator closing. The room was quiet again. Just Jae-hoon and Nia. Jae-hoon looked at the pile of ash on the floor. "It's over," he said. "No," Nia said, walking over and sitting on the edge of the desk. "The war is over. The work is just starting. You still have an empire to fix, Mr. Kang." "I don't want the empire," Jae-hoon said, looking at her. "Not the one I had. That empire was built on shadows. It was built on the idea that I had to be a monster to be a king. I'm tired of being a monster, Nia." He reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, a contrast to the cold metal he'd been wearing all night. "I want to build something that stays in the light," he whispered. "Something like what your father would have wanted to build." Nia's eyes softened. She squeezed his hand back. "Then let's go home and draw up the blueprints." The next 6 months were a blur of transformation. Seoul watched in confusion as Kang Logistics didn't just return to the market, it evolved. The reorganization that Seo-yoon had started was finished, but not the way she intended. Jae-hoon sold off the shadowy interests. He cut ties with the triads, using the invisibles to make sure the divorce was permanent and bloodless. He moved out of the penthouse. He said the view was too distant. He bought a traditional hanok house in a quiet, wooded area on the edge of the city. No marble, no glass, just wood, paper, and the sound of the wind in the pines. Nia didn't go back to Atlanta. Her contract with the agency ended, but her contract with Jae-hoon was just beginning. She wasn't his nurse. She wasn't his medic. She was the chief of security and operations for the new Kang Reed Foundation. And Malik, Nia's brother, arrived in Seoul 3 months after the Hayat confrontation. Jae-hoon had arranged for him to attend the best international school for the deaf in Asia. On his first day, Jae-hoon had been there, sitting in his manual wheelchair at the school gates, watching Malik sign, "Thank you," with a grin that could power a city. But the real work was happening in Incheon. Jae-hoon and Nia were standing on a renovated pier, looking at a building that was nearing completion. It was the Jae-hoon Kang Rehabilitation and Vocational Center. It wasn't just for dockworkers. It was for anyone the city had tried to throw away. The injured, the broken, the ones who had been told they would never walk or work again. "The equipment arrives on Tuesday," Nia said, checking her tablet. "The staff is vetted. Most of them are former military medics. They know how to handle the dragon temperament." Jae-hoon laughed. It was a full, deep sound that had no trace of the hospital room in it. He looked healthy. His skin was tanned, his arms were like iron cords, and his eyes were bright with a purpose that didn't involve a gun. "I'm not that bad," he said. "You're a nightmare," Nia countered, smiling, "but you're my nightmare." He rolled his chair closer to her. The sun was setting over the yellow sea, painting the water in strokes of orange and violet. "I've been thinking about the bathroom floor," Jae-hoon said quietly, "about the pills." Nia looked down at him. "Why?" Because I realize now that the paralysis wasn't the injury, he said. The injury was the loneliness. I was a king with a million subjects and not a single friend. I had a wife who was a stranger and a brother who was a thief. He looked at Nia, his gaze unwavering. You didn't just help me stand up, Nia. You helped me see. I've spent 40 years building walls. You're the only one who ever bothered to look for the door. Nia felt a lump form in her throat. She stepped into the space between his knees, the same way she had in the ballroom, and rested her hands on his shoulders. Choice 1, she whispered. We talk about the past until the sun goes down. Jaehoon reached up and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Choice 2, he said. We build the future. He pulled her down, and they kissed there on the pier, with the smell of the sea and the sound of construction in the air. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was the kiss of two survivors who had found a home in each other's scars. In the distance, the lights of Seoul were coming on, but the dragon wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at the woman holding his heart. Across town, in the deep, dark hold of a cargo ship bound for the southern tip of the continent, two people were moving heavy iron crates. They were covered in grease, their designer clothes long ago replaced by stained coveralls. They had no phones. They had no names. They only had the work. And every time the ship's intercom crackled with a new command, the voice on the other end, steady, cold, and familiar, reminded them exactly why they were there. The dragon never forgets, but for the first time in his life, he had learned how to forgive himself. And that's the story, family. A man who thought his life ended when his legs stopped moving. A woman who proved that a heartbeat is the only rhythm you need to march to war. And a city that learned that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a man with power. It's a man with a reason to live. If this finale hit you in the chest, if you're glad Jaehoon and Nia found their peer, then you know what to do. Smash that like button. Share this with someone who needs to know that being broken doesn't mean being finished. And tell me in the comments, what is the exoskeleton in your life? What is the thing you use to stand up when the world wants you to crawl? I'm reading every single one. This has been Afro-K Dark Diaries. We tell the stories that the light is too afraid to touch. Keep your eyes open, keep your heart guarded, and never let them see you break.